Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here today. My name is Erica Austin. I am with Dogwise, and I'm joined today by Karis Nafte, who is the author of the book, Who Keeps the Dog? Hi, Karis. How are you doing today?
Hello, Erica. I'm doing great. Thanks. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be here. So, we're going to be talking about this book, Who Keeps the Dog? This is a deep dive conversation into pet custody. So, if you're joining us live or if you're watching the recording later, we would love to know where you're tuning in from. So, go ahead and leave a comment for us. If you have any questions throughout the interview, I'll be sure to remind you all, but make sure that you leave a comment. Karis is going to be answering our questions today about pet custody. If you have read the book, we want to know. So, leave a comment if you've read the book. If you haven't read it yet, you can get it at dogwise.com. There will be a special coupon code available for you at the end of our interview. And if you are more of an audiobook person, Karis's book is now available on Audible, which is a pretty exciting development. We're super excited to have that. So I'm just going to show you all. We do have a little preview.
Dogs, divorce, and the law.
So cool that we've got this on Audible. I think that something that dog trainers do a lot is we're in the car and we're driving to talk to people and help them with different behavior cases. So being able to add more knowledge to our tool belt and more things, more skills that we can build, this is a great resource for people who might be in the car tuning in and listening there. So if you want to listen on Audible, it's available there as well. If you have read the book, we would love to hear from you. And Karis, I just want to start by saying pet custody. Like, I didn't even know this was a thing. And I have people all the time who are like, why would I need to know about this? I'm not getting divorced. I don't know anyone who's getting divorced. People just figure it out. Dogs aren't kids. But this is an issue. This is a big enough issue that you're writing a book about it. So can you tell us why you decided to write this book and kind of what your background is in pet custody?
Definitely. So it's funny, Erica, like I have this conversation almost every time I introduce myself to people, and people like roll their eyes like, what do you mean pet custody? But let me throw a quick statistic out for everybody who's tuning in. In America, every 1.3 seconds, someone files for divorce or people file for divorce. And 70% of those people have a pet in the picture, according to the statistics I last read. Okay. So even if you yourself have never been in this position or you don't yet know somebody who has, just wait, because I promise you this is becoming such an enormous issue that once you start hearing about it, you're going to suddenly hear it everywhere. And even people listening now, they might go, oh, wait, what no about my neighbor and my cousin or my client? So I think especially for people who are tuning in who are dog professionals, pet professionals, this is a really important topic that you have to know about. So for myself, my background is I have been working with dogs since 1996 as a dog trainer, as a certified dog behavior consultant. I'm an agility trainer. I've worked with dogs on movies. I've kind of done a little bit of everything. I've been really fortunate. I've had a really wonderful career with animals and dogs. And I had this sort of when you just notice something with clients, like, hey, you keep picking up the same kind of issue. And about 10 years ago, I kind of went through this phase of I was working with dogs who were, the normal things we see: anxious, peeing on the couch, had nipped the children, changing their behavior. And the reason why the dog's behavior was not good, the dogs were not peaceful, was because of the divorce. And I'm not talking about the sort of short-term pressure of like the actual period where you're going through a divorce, which is just inevitably stressful. There's no way for it not to be stressful, really. Then you move through it. But I'm talking about people who were sort of sharing their dog for a few months or a few years, and the dog was very stressed by it. Or situations where the two people were getting a divorce, they both got lawyers, and the person with the better lawyer got the dog, but not the person who really loved the dog the most. And like suddenly the dog was in the backyard because they didn't actually want it, but it was like a symbol of winning something or, getting one over their ex. So I was noticing this a lot. And for myself, I have been divorced twice. And I'm currently on a third happy marriage, 15 years into it. So I'll borrow Patricia McConnell's phrase, which is I had two practice husbands. So I have been divorced myself. I know what that feels like, and all the emotions that come along with it. So it was this sort of awareness where I just started asking questions of divorce professionals saying, hey, what do you do about the dogs? I started looking into the laws and looking into the statistics. And I realized that while there are plenty of people who kind of fight legal battles around pets, I couldn't find anybody with my background in animals who was participating in this conversation. Because what I notice, and I mean, what I still see, and that's why I'm so grateful to have this platform to share this information, is that even people who love animals are making what I would call the wrong decisions about them in divorce. They're off kind of operating on misconceptions. Like one of the biggest misconceptions I'll just throw out there, that I help people with, is that the idea that dogs like having two parents or two homes, or that like they like moving back and forth between two houses. They don't. It's like some dogs can tolerate it. That's a better way to look at it. But the kind of misconception that we should pretend a dog is like a toddler and treat it the same way. Some of the people I work with, they swap their dog between two houses 2 or 3 times a week. And you can imagine what this is like for a dog, kind of ping-ponging back and forth. So I do a lot of education around things like the different breeds of dogs. So we would have to treat a guard dog breed or a flock guardian dog very differently than a retrieving breed, in the sense of establishing who is the dog bonded with primarily, how would those dogs adjust to moving between houses. So there's a lot of dog background education that can be so helpful to people, both divorce professionals and the people themselves, so that they can make decisions for their dogs in this really emotionally overwhelming time that are good for the dog and good for the people in the long run.
And what a unique perspective for you to bring in your background in animal behavior. And, I've been there with like having been a canine professional, and you start to see those patterns of like, wow, I'm getting a lot of leash reactivity or whatever it is, right? These clients that you start to see the pattern of working with. But I think it's amazing that you were able to, we talk a lot in the dog training world about, we are seeing a undesirable behavior, right? But what's the underlying cause? Yeah, we can stop it, or we can train, right? We can do a DRI, we can train something we'd rather see, but what's really going on? What's the cause? Like, what's the function? What's the function of this behavior? What's actually happening? So for you to recognize this common thread and then see that there's not enough information from the animals, like an animal welfare perspective, you really found a niche, didn't you?
I found the biggest, littlest niche out there. I really did. And I would just say to anybody who's watching this, who's sort of has an idea, but it hasn't really caught on yet, just keep pushing it. Because if the best quote I ever heard from someone, this was a long time ago, he said to me, it usually takes like 10 or 15 years to be an overnight success. And that's how I feel, because I've spent so many years talking about this. So I should just say that in addition to being a dog behavior consultant, I'm also a mediator. So I also am an accredited family mediator. So I can work within the sort of the divorce world specifically, but I just do the pet side. I don't help people mediate their entire divorce. But so I've kind of got those two perspectives and those two skill sets. But just keep pushing it, because when I say keep pushing it, I mean an idea that is necessary or something that really can be helpful. But new ideas always take time to catch on. And really what motivated me to write this book was, I thought, gosh, this is such useful information I can give to people. And the people who read my book at the time they need it, they are so appreciative that this book exists. It's not a book that every single dog owner will need, but when you need it, you need it. Mm-hmm. And to all the vets out there, it's like, you'd be surprised, Erica, how many people, the first person they ask when they're getting a divorce about what to do is they actually ask their vet. Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting.
Because it's like vets are sort of seen like this, like an authority figure, like vets should know everything about dogs. And so, yes. Oh, Mallory sent a sweet question. Yes, Mallory, I wish you had had the book too. So it's so incredibly helpful for anybody, whether you're a dog professional or a divorce professional, because the information is the same. It just depends on what side of the table you're looking at it from.
And even like Mallory's saying, even being someone who's gone through a divorce and had to ask these tough questions, I think this is something like there's a precedent for separating your property or even custody when it comes to children. But what about our pets? And so I actually want to show one of our first pages in the book. You start off this book with an introduction, a letter to your dog, talking about the things that are going to change and the things that aren't going to change. And so, why did you decide to open with this kind of personal note? And do you recommend that people actually go through this exercise themselves and actually sit down and write a letter to their dog when they're going through this divorce?
Absolutely. So I wrote this letter. I wanted to start the book with this letter because the hardest part, in my opinion, the hardest shift for people to make is to really think about their dog's best interest. It is, which might mean maybe you have to say goodbye to your dog. I mean, that's just the reality of being in this sort of situation. And because of everything else that is involved in a divorce, the emotions that you have toward your ex, the reason why you got a divorce, there's so many reasons, the sense of anger, the sense of betrayal, the sense of failure or fear, all of those incredibly difficult emotions that can come up. It is incredibly challenging. It takes a really a huge level of self-awareness to put your own feelings just to the side and think about, wait a minute, what's really best for my dog? And so I want people to try to look at the situation through their dog's eyes and not make it about winning. Like, no, I'm going to get the dog because it'll really piss him off or it'll really hurt her. Or, I want the dog because they treated me so bad in the marriage. And none of those things are about the dog. So the whole book and especially this letter is to try to pivots people's perspectives. Like, this is not a book to like win a legal fight about the dog. This is a book about how do you make this decision in the most kind-hearted way for your dog. So I mean, like I was working with some clients a couple of weeks ago, and we had this really heartbreaking conversation. The three of us, we were in a mediation session, and with these people, they'd already been sharing their dog. They'd been sharing the dog 1 week on, 1 week off with each other. The dog had developed various anxiety sort of behaviors. And what had happened was that even though the dog was clearly stressed by its life, which in this case was moving back and forth between the two houses, the solution they came to was just to put it on, behavior medication to try to make it less stressed. And I had to say, like, those medications are wonderful tools, but do we really want to keep a dog in a situation that can be changed, but sort of force it to be moved between two houses, put it on medication to make a difficult situation more tolerable so that you can continue to share it? Is that really the right thing that we want to do for your dog? And it was a very hard conversation, because I don't really think they had sort of thought about it ironically, that they were just more thinking, this is what we're doing. We're sharing the dog. How are we going to make it work? And the sort of idea that we're going to make this work was like, okay, and how do you think this is actually impacting on your dog? And so it was very challenging to sort of work through that. But that's why they hired me. They wanted to get a different perspective on what was happening. And in the end, the one party agreed to let the other one be the primary owner of the dog, which was wonderful and heartbreaking, but the dog is so much happier. So that's those are the kind of conversations people need to have and be prepared to have also.
Well, and I think too, behavioral medication is already such a hot topic. People have a lot of feelings about it, but what you're talking about is so important of like, what is best for the dog? What is best overall? How can we look at this from the dog's perspective and not make it all about ourselves, which is actually, so I'm going to share another page from the book, which is pages 19 and 20 of the book, which is available for sale at dogwise.com. You can get an ebook or you can get the paperback. And some of the stumbling blocks that you see that you highlight here, one of the big ones that you talk about is actually humanizing the dog. And this quote, we pulled this quote out and I shared it on our social media yesterday. I think this quote really hit me because it does apply in so many circumstances, not just when you're going through divorce or through a tough time. But if you're going to humanize the dog, there's a risk there. There's some fallout there that can happen. And not just, one of the other things that you mentioned is weaponizing the dog. But this quote where you say, if you can't see dogs for what they are, you're less likely to see a dog's needs for what they are. Can you speak a little bit more to that, Karis, and kind of what that quote means and what it means to you and where you see this in your practice and what we can do about it?
Yeah. So like I said earlier, it's sometimes very hard for people to, especially, so let's talk about people getting divorced if there's no human children, right? Like there's only dog children, the fur kids. So for people, if there are no human children and they're going through a divorce, without realizing it, or by completely realizing it, people often will just completely see their dog as their child. And they'll say, this dog is my child. And it feels like that. And we've raised it together. This dog is our child. And it's not. It is a dog. You can love it like that. And in your heart, you can love it as much as a child. Absolutely. But in this situation we're talking about, if you have decided you're going to treat your dog exactly like a child instead of, like the 5-year-old German Shepherd that it is, who needs to go to the park and needs to play Frisbee and, needs to have his need to work and be a working dog met, you're going to end up with a dog that is, of course, much more likely to have behavioral issues because its needs of being, in my example, a 5-year-old German Shepherd, that's not a toddler. And that dog needs, it's like, I think a lot of people, there's, I say, do you take your dog out? Like, it's like, oh yeah, I take my dog out every day. I take it to a coffee shop. And it's like, well, that's nice, but does your dog get to run? Does your dog get to sniff in the grass and do dog things and then go to the coffee shop with you? But we can't imagine that.
Coffee shops. That's the thing that I read. So if people are like, oh, I'm going to take my dog to the brewery. And I'm like, that doesn't sound fun for the dog. And really taking the dog, what the dog wants and needs into consideration is important. Absolutely.
Exactly. And it falls into place when it comes to divorce because I know I was talking to another trainer colleague of mine, and she is a puppy raiser for guide dogs. So every year she raises a Labrador and she trains it and she bonds with it and she falls in love with it. And then that dog, of course, leaves the puppy raiser home and goes on to its life as a guide dog. And I use that example with my clients because a lot of people tell me, they say, my dog can't live without me. And that's not true. All of us who work in rescue situations, which I'm sure half the people here listening have. I've worked in shelters for more than 30 years, helping with rehomings and, all of the stuff that goes on there. And we know that dogs are okay. Under normal circumstances, that there's always a transition period, but a dog can be happy in a new situation with a new person. But as soon as you add divorce into that conversation, people seem to forget that. And there's an idea that their dog will, die an emotional death if it doesn't see both of them. And that isn't the case, just like with the puppy raiser. So we have to almost look at a divorce in the same way that you'd look at a rehoming, in that, how would you handle a dog's, the behavior of a transition, and apply all those tools, even though the humans themselves might be in an incredibly overwhelming emotional state themselves because of what they're going through.
Yeah. And I think that I have another quote to share that you have in the book as well, that says being anthropomorphic allows us to be empathetic and compassionate towards our dogs, but it can also get us into trouble when our own emotional lives become overwhelming, like during a divorce. And that, again, this is another quote that really jumped out at me because I remember when we were when I've been a part of this project with you, Karis, since you first pitched the idea to Dogwise, and talking about this, like, anthropomorphism, and it's kind of a bad word in the dog professional world, but there's a benefit there, and that benefit to being able to be empathetic is important. We do want to be able to say, what is the best thing for this animal that's in my care? But there's also the other side of it, right? And that is the part where we are seeing that fallout, where people are making it more about them. There's actually a little section right here that has these things that people say about the dog, and what you might have heard, or what you might have heard other maybe clients saying, and then what's really going on there. Is it really you projecting your feelings onto the dog? So I pulled these up. Actually, Lynn asked a few minutes ago if I could make the print a little bit larger. So Lynn, this one's for you. I pulled this part of the page out so everyone could be able to read it easily. These might be some things that maybe you've heard. Have you heard these phrases like this, Karis?
I have, yes. I've heard it all. Let me tell you. Yeah. No, people really do. I mean, when you read this, it might seem a bit silly. I mean, you might think, oh, who would actually say that? But people say that a lot. So especially things about new relationships, like, oh, I don't think the dog likes the new girlfriend, or the dog is very stressed when the new girlfriend is around. Or the dog is mad. Things, especially when, I think it's when it comes to really challenging issues like, infidelity or any kind of betrayal. I mean, there's so many kinds of betrayals that can happen in a divorce situation. And it's a lot easier to say the dog is angry at you than to say I'm angry at you, or I'm really hurting. So it's dogs sort of, and I mean, if you talk to any child psychologist, people will do the same thing with their children. Like there's really the child psychologists I know, and we always have a big laugh about how, laugh is the wrong word, but it's like the fact that it's interchangeable, the way people will say, well, the dog is mad at you. And they'll say, the 8-month-old baby is mad at you. There's a lot of crossover there, unfortunately. But yes, so people will very easily sort of use a dog to speak their own emotions through, either because they're not able to feel what they're really feeling, or it's just easier, or maybe more hurtful to try to sort of use the dog as a let's say a weapon of your own feelings, or a conduit for what you're feeling. So it's like dogs don't understand divorce. People sometimes tell me too, they say, oh, well, our dog knows we're going through a divorce. It's like, of course your dog doesn't. Dogs don't understand these concepts. They might know you're stressed. They might know that the house is not behaving in the way it usually does. And dogs will, of course, behave accordingly. I think whenever people are stressed, whether you're stressed for a divorce, or you're stressed because you've lost your job, or in illness, anything, you'll, sort of broadly, you'll get the dogs who sort of act out, or the dogs who act in. So, you get the dogs who, will try to break up a fight by coming between you and being playful and bringing a toy. And then you'll get the dogs who respond to a fight by hiding in the closet. And that's just the nature of the dogs that you get. But to imagine that your dog would have a concept of this thing called divorce is another example of humanizing a dog. That's what I would describe it as.
We have got a question from one of our viewers. Anyone who's tuning in, if you've got a question about pet custody or divorce, or how to support clients, if you're a dog trainer or an animal care professional, or in the divorce world, in the legal world, feel free to leave a comment for us. We are very interested in hearing what you have to say. Mallory's got a great question. She says, both of my previous dogs from previous relationships ended up with my exes. And great point. Like, maybe not even a divorce, maybe just a relationship that ends, that you did have a pet together. Thank you for bringing that up, Mallory. Uh, both pets and both dogs ended up under cared for. In the most recent case, my dog went from a big house with a yard with me to an apartment where he now lives. He was only using the bathroom on the tiny balcony until I intervened. Now he takes walks, but I feel so badly for him that he doesn't have a big yard anymore. Do you have any encouragement for someone like me that he might still be okay, or any help in communicating my concerns with an ex? That's a wonderful question.
That really is. Thank you for sharing that, Mallory. And I'm sorry. It's a heartbreaking feeling when you love your dog and you don't know how they are doing. The huge challenge, of course, is communicating that to your ex without, kind of fanning the flames of when I say the flames of argument, let's say, not the flames, but it's very, very tricky to communicate with your ex without them feeling like you're meddling in a situation, or, it's like you don't want to make them angry in trying to check in on the dog. So my suggestion would be to involve some kind of third party, like maybe there's a mutual friend that could go and somehow communicate with your ex just to check in on your dog. And maybe your dog is fine. Maybe your dog's getting lots of walks and your dog's adjusted to the new routine and the new life that, the new situation that it's in. But my most practical suggestion would be to probably not contact your ex directly, because that will likely just make them feel angry or like you're trying to manage the situation or somehow. So I would try to find a third party that and don't be sneaky about it. You can say, look, Mallory just wanted me to check on Rover. But if it's through a third person, then it can often soften it a little bit. And then hopefully that person can communicate with you so that you'll feel better about it. So that's what I would try. Yeah.
Do you have situations, Karis, where maybe there was an agreement about who the dog would go with, and then 6 months, a year, 2 years later, there's a change? Either maybe the ex got married and there's a different dynamic, and so there's, maybe, does it change, or is it kind of like, okay, one and done, this is what we decided, so we're not going to go back on that? Or is it, I don't want to say worth the fight, but I mean, to Mallory's point, like, what happens is there, where, and is it on an individual case by case basis of like, where's the line between I want to do what's best for my dog, but maybe what's best for my dog is not getting involved with my ex and bringing up all of this and like having a fight about this dog? Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it's, first of all, it's hugely individual. It depends on you as a person. It depends on where you live in terms of the rules about dogs and the legality, depending on what state or what country you live in, if it's something you can fight. Certainly a lot of my clients that I work with haven't even been married, but they were in a relationship and they got a dog together. And many of the people I see have sort of come up with an agreement themselves that was working for a time, and then it wasn't. So sometimes what makes it kind of turn a little sour or feel like they have to change something is when one of the two people gets involved in a new relationship. And the truth is that it can often feel very weird suddenly if you're in a new relationship with someone and this person is constantly in contact with their ex because of the dog. And that often it suddenly just starts to feel, wait, hang on, have I really left that previous relationship? We're talking all the time about Rover. So sometimes that creates a need for a change where people say, listen, I can't, we need to do something different. I don't want to see you every week to change the dog around. So in those situations, you can definitely change things. If there's things like court orders, so, if people have very much gone the legal route with things and there's court orders about where the dog's going to go, those are very difficult to change. The challenge is, so what's quite interesting about this is, I think it's 8 states now, and I should know exactly how many states, so that's a little bit embarrassing, but in several states, the laws around dogs are different than the rest of the states in America. In most states, dogs are considered property, which means if you get a divorce, your dog is not looked at any differently than a toaster. It's a thing. It is a object with a set owner, and whoever can prove they own the toaster / dog is the one who gets it, even if the other person clearly is the one who's loved the dog and, taking the dog to the groomer, etc. That's in most states, but in about 8 states, like I said, in California and Illinois, Alaska, I think Rhode Island and New York, and quite a few others. And you can Google this to find out what your state's rules are. In other states, dogs in a divorce, and cats, all pets, all companion animals, we can look at the broader picture to decide what's actually the right home for the dog. Where should it go? It's the same in British Columbia and Canada. The rules have changed there. They've changed in Australia. The whole country of Australia has now also updated their laws. And I'm actually on a committee now that's involved in trying to push this law change in England and Wales. So we were in the House of Lords the other day talking about this is so important to get this law changed. So the rules are very different, just to answer your question, about what can be done and what can't be done. So it is very tricky. But yes, you can change things. If it is if there's a court order, it's much more difficult. But if you had a court order, you've also had a lawyer who can kind of talk you through it. The challenge is that the court systems are busy. They're often backed up. This is not usually at the top of people's priorities if you kind of want what's going on with the dog. So it's not an easy thing. My strong suggestion always, if possible, is to avoid getting lawyers and try to use mediation. Obviously, people can contact me, but there's lots of good mediators out there, because in mediation, you get to make the choice yourselves. And as soon as I call it lawyering up, as soon as you both got lawyers, the decision can often end up out of your hands. And then you don't even actually have any power about what's going to happen. So it's a slippery slope. And obviously sometimes there's no choice but to get a lawyer, of course, but sometimes there is. So try to first not kind of go the hardest direction, but see if you can work through it yourself. As hard as it is, there's support to help you do that.
That's a great answer. We've got another really great question. Mallory's asking some great questions today. Having worked in the family court system, are you aware of any legal standards for pet custody in divorce? If not, should there be? What standards should exist? And do you currently advocate for the changes in the court system? So you spoke to this a little bit. Really cool. Yeah. You're in the House of Lords trying to change this in England and Wales. Yeah. That's pretty neat. Yeah. And I also know you're not even located in the United States, right?
I am not. So I am very international and remote. I am talking to you now from Cape Town in South Africa. So I grew up in Oregon. So I'm from Portland, Oregon, but I moved here many years ago, and have a family here and a behavior practice. And it's a really fascinating, beautiful part of the world. I live right on the bottom of the continent on the ocean. It's really beautiful. But because of where I live, because I'm kind of in the middle between America and Australia, I do a lot of work in Australia. I'm headed there in a couple of weeks to spend a few weeks working in Australia and giving some presentations at some legal conferences. Wow. And I work in America. Yeah. So it's quite, I'm very well known in Australia as sort of the sort of world expert in this, which is quite cool because the laws have just changed there. So yes, we're going to Sydney, and we're going to help all the divorced people help their clients make good decisions about their pets. We hope.
That's fantastic. To Mallory's question, what would your pie in the sky dream be if there was like a standard? Would it be good to have a standard when it comes to pet custody? I know you mentioned that there are several states where the companion animals are treated differently than in other states. So I think it's amazing that you're international and that you even know. When you said, oh, it's embarrassing, I don't know how many states. I'm like, I don't know how many states, like I'm in the States and I don't know that. So that's neat that you know that, but that's a lot for you to keep up with. So, and like you said, not a lot of people who have this knowledge or expertise. So would having standards, a legal standard, be an ideal? Would it be like thinking about pets as property? I know that kind of feels a little sticky and not great. So what would your ideal be, since this is your expertise?
Yeah. So definitely property is not good, because it in interest, sadly, for a lot of people, there's a lot of situations where If there's cases of domestic violence where people will stay in a relationship because they know they wouldn't be able to take their dog with them because their ex could prove ownership. So sadly, that's a very frequent dynamic that happens quite a lot, that often is sort of propels the laws to change. So my pie in the sky wish would be very similar to the legislation that's just been passed in Australia and in British Columbia. And look, it's very tricky. It's not like, it's like prove the dog loves you the most. It's not an easy, it's not an easy thing to determine outright. But those standards have put forth things like who can prove that they've spent the most time with the dog, who exercises the dog, who is bonded with the dog, who has cared for the dog the most. And what I like about that legislation is that the law says that the dog cannot be shared between two people. And that is my dream. There are some states, specifically California and others, where the law is a little bit not as crystal clear, where people are ordered to share their dog. And some judges will do this because it is fair, technically, like it is the most fair thing to say you have to share the dog 1 week on, 1 week off. But that's not thinking about the dog. Then what you've got, and this is what I see, is, even as dogs get old or they get sickly, they're still being moved back and forth every week. And this can become very stressful for the dogs, and it can become so stressful for the people. Can you imagine that you have to see your ex every single week for the rest of your dog's life? It becomes very, very challenging for people, not to mention the stress on the animals involved. So if I had a magic wand, the legislation would look at the primary bond of the dog, the best home situation, and always to put something in place that if the first person cannot keep the dog, the other would get the first right of refusal. So it's not like a completely cut off from the dog, but to allow for sharing the dog opens the floodgates for dogs constantly in a sharing situation, which from my point of view and my behavior point of view really can be very hard on the dogs in the long run. So that would be my hope for everybody, that's what the laws say eventually around the world.
You've got some great information in the book about this topic that we're talking about. And I remember when I was first reading it, kind of a little bit about who's paying the vet bills, who's paying the dog walker, who's taking the dog to the groomer and that kind of a thing. But also chapter 3 of this book talks about negotiating guidelines and kind of giving people a little bit of a roadmap. Hopefully before you're in this situation would be ideal. Everyone go out and read this book just in case you ever know someone who might be in this situation of trying to make sure that, how do you navigate this? This is so hard. And it's not something that people think about a lot. And of course, we're saying here, put the well-being of the dog first, but that can be really difficult to figure out what that looks like. And that's something that I do find to be really helpful in this book that you've set out is here's some things to consider. And I love this subheading. I know the font is a little bit small, but considering shared custody wisely. Do you feel that people rush into shared custody as, like I heard you say a minute ago, there are definitely some judges or some legal professionals who are like, well, that seems fair, maybe fair to the people. Is that fair to the dog? And like, what are some fallout that you see around shared custody?
I see a tremendous amount of fallout around shared custody. And I think many people assume that they're just going to share the dog. They sort of, some breakups are not as, it can be very amicable and it can just be peaceful. And I think people are, I don't quite want to say naive, but they just don't know what that's going to feel like in a few months from then. And so the main fallout I see with the dogs is a lot of anxiety issues cropping up with them. I see, aggressive behavior and house training issues, all the kinds of, and I even cover this in the book, like the whole range of behaviors that we might see in any dog who was in a stressful situation, self-mutilation, becoming withdrawn or becoming aggressive even with other dogs. So all the ways dogs tell us in doggy language or cat language, the cat stress as well, that they're not coping with the situation. And the most heartbreaking thing that my clients and I work with is when the dog knows they're going to the other owner's house, that they hide, that they don't want to get in the car, that they have to be dragged into the car to go there. And that when they get to each house, they don't eat for 2 days because they're just too stressed and they have to sort of gather themselves before they're in the house. And what's important to understand is that a dog can love both people. This is not like the dog doesn't like one of the people, but the transitions are hard. Even if even if they love the person, the sort of emotion, the up and down of the saying goodbye to one and the excitement of the reunion with the other, it's a lot on a dog's system. So and this is just what I really want people to understand is we can't imagine that this is going to be happy for your dog. You have to see if they can handle it. If they can handle it, fine. Some dogs, if they're very, very easygoing and just have that kind of nature, they can happily swap between houses. But in my experience, those dogs are rare. And that's the truth of it. So one suggestion I do have for people is that if they do think they want to share their dog, that they make the visits with each person as long as possible. So like minimum 2 weeks at a time. I even suggest a month or like 2 months is easier on the dog than every week is really intense on them. Less than that is just incredibly, incredibly hard on a dog to like bounce back and forth and this home and that home and this home and that home. And when I say that, I say you should look at a 2-month thing. It can be often it's like, no, but I can't be away from the dog for that long. And it's like, well, if it's better for your dog, really, like, can you really not handle yourself? Like, think about your dog. What's better for them?
Right.
So, yeah. So those are some ideas that people can kind of mull around in their own head.
Especially thinking about, we know that dogs they do have a sense of time, and thinking about that just breaks my heart, thinking about these dogs who are anticipating this transition. And like you said, the stress of moving to a new home environment and not eating for a couple of days or having those behavior issues pop up, that has got to be so hard on all parties involved. Something that you do in the book that I really appreciate is at the end of every chapter, you ask summary questions. You're giving the reader the opportunity to reflect on some of these questions. And this one I pulled from a section about shared custody of how do we know if this is working for the dog? How do we know, how are we keeping in mind all of these different factors so that it's not just a 50-50, 1 week on, 1 week off seems fair to the humans involved. So really giving the readers an opportunity to reflect on these questions and think about what they've read and how it applies to them. Because as you said, this is all a very individual kind of experience for people. So I love the summary questions that you involve at the end of every chapter. I think that that's such a great resource for people. And you obviously have quite a lot of experience with this and know what questions to ask. So I think that that's a wonderful addition to the book. We've got another question. Do you work with or see divorcing people that do get along and agree about their pets? If so, what does that look like?
Yeah. So definitely it worked for some people. I think for me, generally, I don't see those people. I see people who need help. So I'm sure there's lots of people out there who are just fine and they're working okay with their dogs. But in my experience, I've just observed patterns of sort of timelines of the people that I work with, and also talking to my colleagues around the world, the divorce mediators I work with who kind of echo back a similar sort of pattern to me. Ironically, usually when people get along best about their pets is when there's also children in the picture. So for some people, they, there's little kids or there's small children or teenagers or whatever, and the dog, especially if the dog is really bonded with the kids, it is easier for that dog to move with the children because the children become kind of the steady factor. Now we have to be really kind of on it, let's say, look carefully at each situation, because I think, we all know parents who've bought a dog for their kid, but the dog is really not very interested in the child. Maybe the kid's too young, or maybe it's not a very great breed. That's like, this is actually a dog that needs like an adult sort of intensity. But for dogs who are really bonded with the kid, then, or with the children, then in those situations, usually, and I work with a lot of parents like this, there's a real desire to make it okay for the dog. And because there's children in the picture, people are less focused on the dog, which is actually easier. The dog can sort of take a back seat and not be everybody's focus, which is easier on dogs. And then, if both parents are in agreement, like, okay, we have to decide, the dog needs the same rules at both houses. It's not, if the dog's allowed to sleep in the child's bed at mom's house, it needs to also be the same at the other parent's house. Otherwise, they can get a little bit confusing for them. So it certainly can work. But it just takes, it takes quite a lot of work from people, and sort of always to check in, like, is this still working for us? And if it's not working, we need to change something. And maybe one of us needs to be the primary person for the dog.
So that's a really good point, that we as the professionals, the canine professionals or the legal professionals, usually don't see people until there's a problem. So that makes a lot of sense to me. One thing that you say in the book, I pulled this text out of one of the pages of an earlier chapter. Love this advice. Talk about your dog as soon as possible, because it seems that your experience is that people often leave the dog to the end. So here in this section, it says, talking about your dog first, not last, during your divorce is good for the sake of the dog, regardless of why people leave the dog to the end of the divorce negotiation. This is when the fight about the dog becomes bigger than it needs to be. So the sooner you decide about the dog, the less likely you will be tempted to use the dog as a bargaining chip or a weapon later in the discussion. So that is such great advice of, again, maybe it's not a priority. I heard you say this about another, a lot of, even from the legal side, people are like, oh yeah, we'll worry about the dog another time. But really looking at this from the perspective of what is best for the dog, and for the dog's sake to bring it up first.
And to bring it up first too. And I don't know how many lawyers I've talked to over the years who have horror cases where everything was resolved except the dog, and that just derailed everything. It's like, nope, I'm keeping it. No, I'm keeping it. So if you are scared to bring it up, when I say bring it up, bring up the who's keeping the dog. Don't assume that you're both on the same page. If neither of you is brave enough to bring it up, you're probably both very scared about losing the dog. And that then when you do actually, it's not like you can sneak it in at the end, like, okay, well, and by the way, I'm going to take Rover. Obviously, it's like the other person will probably say, no, you're not. And everything falls apart. It, as scary as it is to bring it. And also I think some people, it's like, they don't want to poke a bear. If the breakup is a intense one, people are sometimes too scared to bring it up. It's like, oh, I'm too scared to bring it up, which I understand. But the fact that you're scared means it's a big issue, and you have to find a way to proactively work with it. I mean, I know of lawyers who say specifically, don't talk about the dog because we can use that later to get something, which is of course not taking the dogs into consideration in any way. But not all lawyers are like that at all. But some lawyers just don't think about it. They don't realize how, because the emotions are so big. Even if it's just a little, dog that's not worth any amount of money, it's worth the emotions, and that in and of itself makes it a hugely important issue that should be looked at as soon as possible. And it makes it the sooner you deal with it, the easier it is.
That's wonderful advice. In the book, you talk about pet nup. Can you tell everybody what a pet nup is?
A pet nup is just what it sounds like. It's a agreement that you write with your partner when things are good and you're both still in love with each other, but you decide to get a pet, and you write out, if we should break up, please, let's hope we don't, but then what will happen with the dog? And there's different, like anything, there's different sort of degrees of legality with these, but I highly recommend that everybody and anyone who's watching this, who especially runs a shelter or a dog rescue center, breeders, you want a lot of, I don't know, the statistics are wild around the world about how many dogs end up back at shelters when a divorce happens. It's quite startling. So you want to write out who owns the dog between the two of you in case you should split up. There's plenty of people who write pet nums and just say we're going to share the dog if we separate, which again I understand, but people need to think about that wisely. So I would really suggest people more think about who would the primary owner be should you separate, so that it's written down so that later you can't change your mind and say, no, the dog was mine. No, the dog was mine. And then, then you're caught.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, one of those things you don't think about when things are good and you're happy, but it might save quite a bit of stress later. Yeah. The end of your book, you have some great resources for canine professionals. So, and I say canine professionals, I should say for pet professionals. I know that you also have a section in the book about cats and other species of animals and how that's different. So if you have specific questions about cats and other pets, get the book, available on dogwise.com. It will answer your questions. If it doesn't answer your questions, you can contact Karis.
Yeah.
That you do talk about in the end of the book is if you're a pet professional, what are the professional development opportunities available to people? And can you just tell us a little bit about the certification opportunities that you offer through your company?
Yes. So this is something I am so proud of and so excited. I have developed a 10-hour course for qualified canine, feline professionals who actually want to work as a pet custody consultant. And so for people who see this come up a lot, or if you just want to sort of upskill yourself to offer a new specific, I mean, it sounds very niche, but I promise you, if you start advertising, you start fishing, you'll realize it's not very niche. There's a huge amount of divorce pet situations happening all over the world. So this is, you can earn 10 continuing education units for this. And my dream for this is that every law firm has a pet custody consultant in their books that they call, say, oh, we've got a divorce. There's a dog in the picture. There's 3 dogs in the picture. And you bring in the pet custody consultants to offer from an animal psychology and animal behavior background. How can we determine if the dog should be split up in a pack of dogs? I was just helping a family a couple of weeks ago, and they had three golden doodles, and there's a divorce happening, and they want to separate the dogs in some, fashion. So we went through and we just really looked at the relationships between the dogs and between the people to figure out who should keep which of the dogs and how to do that in the right way. So we want to, the certification course empowers you. I talk you through the whole divorce process, all the hypotheticals, the things to look for, so that you can go in as an expert to offer your opinion and your professional opinion about kind of the very best different options that the people could work through. And it's a really, it's a very new field that is growing so fast. And so if anybody is interested in this, please send me an email. I can send you the information about the next course. I just finished one a couple of weeks ago. It was great. So yeah, this will be a new necessary qualification to have for a lot of people out there.
Well, those of us canine professionals who are always looking for CEUs, and what an amazing thing to add, like we said, to add to your skill set. This is not something, and I wouldn't have thought of that, of like reaching out to local law firms and saying, if you run into this, I'm a canine professional who's had training in this. What a wonderful opportunity. So Karis's website is up on the screen right now. It's www.whokeepsthedog.com. So you can reach out to her there as well. And Karis also has some recommended reading from the back of the book. We pulled a couple of titles to share with you all. Of course, I love all of these books. I've read all of these books. if you're interested in reading these books and learning more, I think, and maybe you can talk to this, but I would bet that Meet Your Dog is up there because of the breed specific traits that you see that might really be contributing to different factors in each of these individual divorces. I did not have room to put on talking terms. Oh, I have it. I actually have this book just sitting on my desk. That never happened. So this is one of my all-time. And obviously I reference it a lot because I just had it sitting on my desk. But if you're interested in any of these books, they are all available at dogwise.com. And we also do have a coupon code I'm going to put up for everyone who stayed here to the end with us. If you would like to save 20% on Karis's book or any book that we've done an author interview on, that's your coupon code. You can use it only at dogwise.com. Everyone who has joined us today, thank you for all of your questions. Really helps make the conversation even more enhanced and enriched. So we appreciate you all tuning in. And Karis, thank you so, so much for your time today. We're so grateful to have you as one of our authors with Dogwise, and we'll see you all again very, very soon.
Thanks, everybody.